Okay, Joe Casey with the Malibu Guru Podcast, and I appreciate you showing up today. We've got a return guest, a guy that's been here before that we've highlighted on the Malibu Guru Podcast, but we're going to talk even deeper this time. I've got Scott Smith with us. Scott is a captain with UPS, former military pilot, really just one of these cool pilots that is knee-deep in aviation, owns a JetPROP and flies it for himself. And this is one of the most wise guys that's just really invested in aviation. It is a pleasure to have him here. Scott, welcome to the Malibu Guru Podcast.
Oh, thank you, Joe. It's great to be back again. I look forward to spending more time with you today.
Yeah. No, it's a bunch of fun. So, okay. So just to remind everybody, you're a 747-800 captain. And I know I asked this before, but I want to ask it again. What's it like taking off in a 747-800? What is that?
It's certainly special. I enjoy it because of the perspective of sitting up that high, actually. But the airplane itself is so well insulated and the engines are so far away from the cockpit that it's a very quiet experience. That's good because you can pay attention to the takeoff parameters. Of course, you're flying with a first officer and usually an international relief officer sitting between the two captain and first officer positions. So that gentleman or lady can also monitor the takeoff profile and make sure that we're not making any errors.
So when you fly, there's three pilots, all three are in the cockpit, and no one else is on the airplane.
Unless we do have what we call jump seaters. There are two additional jump seats in the cockpit. One would be occupied by the international relief officer, and then there would be one separate jump seat available if someone needed to ride in the cockpit to move extra crews.
Right, and tell me what a typical mission is, because you're based out of Louisville. What's your run of the mill?
Well, my favorite trip is a short four-legger, but around the world. So it's Louisville, Honolulu, Hong Kong to Cologne, Germany, and then Cologne back to Louisville.
Golly, and you do that in how many days?
It's a four-legger, but about 6 to 7 days total time because we'll have breaks along the way.
Yeah, so literally once a month you're going around the world.
Oh, easily. Yes.
Easily. I mean, what a different lifestyle it is. I'll tell you what, I just think that like if I didn't do what I do, I would probably do what you're doing in the sense of flying something really, really, really big. 747-800. I mean, there's 1 million pounds that's leaving the asphalt and going into the world, going on to the other side of the world. I just think it's just as cool as could possibly be.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it immensely. It's been a great career, but rapidly closing. I have 11 months until I turn age 65, and the FAA says that's enough. So I'll be making a transition to more JetPROP flying here shortly.
Yeah, I understand. So let's talk about the JetPROP. You're now on your between your fourth and fifth year, so 4.5 years-ish of owning the JetPROP. And what's it like flying a JetPROP to you? Like when you come off of the 747-800 and you come out from a trip, you may go home, but then now within a day or two, you're going to fly the JetPROP somewhere. Easy transition back and forth now? Is it like no big deal? Or
It's becoming much more easy for the transition. Initially, it was quite a shock. Just the positioning of the airplane, the height above the ground, the handling characteristics, regular push-pull tubes and cables instead of hydraulics, and all of those factors come into play. But now I'm reaching 350 hours finally with the JetPROP, with more to come, and so my comfort level has increased greatly, and I find the transition to be fairly seamless. The only issue that is not ever going to change is that it goes from being multi-crew to one person. So I have to change my mindset of now I've got all the responsibility, no one to back me up, and so you have to pay particular attention to your checklist and to normal standard operating procedures so you don't miss anything.
That's right, because it's all you. There's no one there to back. I talk to pilots a lot about this. When you're flying single pilot operations, there's no one to back you up on the whole thing. And you need to put things inside in your program that help you to not forget things. I'll give you a good example. Putting the gear down, where you put the gear into the down position. I teach pilots, leave your fingers on the gear or near, in other words, or you're pointing at it until you see 3 green lights. You don't even pull your hand off of there until you can do other things. You can look around, but in a 747, you can just throw the gear down, and you got another pilot that's looking to make sure that you're going to get green lights. I assume you have 3 green lights in a 747, but the idea until you got a gear safe indication. And it's a different way of doing things. When you're single pilot, it's all you, and you have to approach that from a single pilot operation.
Exactly. And you can actually do the same thing as a sole pilot in your personal aircraft, the same flow and consideration as we do in the airline of running a flow first. You can run your flow to make sure you do whatever the action is that you just mentioned, and then back that up with the checklist and make sure that it's been done. So you have a double check there.
That's right. It's the right way to do it. Use a checklist by you having a flow, having something that you do, and then you pull out your checklist, go down it, make sure you got it all done, and it's a wonderful way to do it.
Sure.
Yeah. Hey, while we're on this, I want to talk about single pilot operations, because things are advancing very rapidly in the technological world. How is it happening with, like, is single pilot ops, is that on the forecast for UPS or in the world you're at?
It's something that we talk about frequently in the cockpit and, of course, with our union, because the company wants to be efficient as it goes forward in time. And this single pilot is a contentious item right now because things are changing and eventually will change. Europeans, as we understand it right now, have the lead in single pilot operations, especially on the Airbus A350, which is being certified in Europe, as we understand, to be available for single pilot operations. So that would simply be then a change in regulation to bring it stateside in the future. How that's going to happen and when and the timeline is to be determined, but change is underway.
Change is always underway, meaning it's always technology is advancing. Things 100 years from now, we're going to do things completely different than we do today. It's going to change. It's just a matter. It brings me back to a fun story, because my dad, I love my dad, but my dad is he loves to do ancestry studies. Like my mom wrote a book basically on our family. They were able to go way back in history and find documents and things and people. And it's so interesting that my mom and dad, really my dad led this, but went back into the family history and found all these neat people that do all this neat stuff. Well, if you look at I basically have an ancestor, if you go back to the late 1800s, early 1900s, that was the Boilermaker Union president. and which is so cool, because you think of like the Purdue Boilermakers. I mean, a Boilermaker at one point in time was a big, gigantic industry. It was huge. And today, we don't have hardly any Boilermakers. I mean, you ask somebody what's a Purdue Boilermaker, they probably could tell you what a Boilermaker, but if you lived in the late 1800s, you knew exactly what a Boilermaker was, because boilers were used on just about anything that moved, and because it was the way you created energy at the time. And back then, the Purdue the Boilermaker Union, my ancestor was over it for a season. And but if you look at it today, there's no Boilermaker Union out there, because the industry moved, the technology shifted. We don't use boilers anymore, or not prolifically like we once did. So there's not that. So if you look at aviation, I mean, today where you have 3 pilots in an airplane going across the ocean, there's probably going to be 2 one day, and there might be one day, and then one day there might be none. You never know. I don't think that's going to happen tomorrow, but it is going to happen one day. And if you look at our world in the PA46, I mean, one of the cool things that Garmin and Piper have done a great job is really pursuing this technological. They've teamed together. I mean, today we have the Autoland. I mean, there's one of 5 or 6 airplanes that have Autoland today. Literally a button you can push, and that will land the airplane without even anybody being on. Somebody has to push the button, but they don't have to be qualified to do anything other than push a button.
Right.
And what a wonderful, wonderful technology. I'm not sure I think we're 4 or 5 years into it right now, and no one's ever pushed the button. It's never saved anybody's life. But what a great technology, what a great thing that's pushing that technological envelope. And there's going to be a day that things are going to change out there.
Right.
And I think change is a coming, and it's always a coming. Change is always a coming. So I'm excited. Is it happening in your world? It happens in our world. And,
Sure.
But I think for a long time in our world, there's going to be pilots, and there's going to be technology moves. And, if you look at your JetPROP, it's one of the most technological airplanes out there right now. It's a fabulous Garmin panel, and you got to know what you're doing to be able to fly it in today's world. And I tell people all the time, one of the things that if you're going to invest in a safety device in the airplane, well, it's not really a device. It's investing in whoever's in that left front seat, because a good pilot is still required and will be for our lifetimes. That's for sure. So kind of interesting to see how things move and what shakes with technology. But at the end of the day, you need a real pilot on board today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's for sure. Okay, I wanted to talk with you about, because you hit in your JetPROP, you hit the time when it's for a hot section inspection.
Yes.
Okay. There's a lot of people that have questions about what goes on in a hot section, when should they do it, how should they do it. How did you approach the time where you said, I want to do a hot section, and it became time? How did you go about making that decision? Who helped you? What went on with that whole hot section?
Sure. Of course, there's a monetary consideration when you pick and make the decision to pursue the hot section. So that's always part of the decision. I decided because, one, it was time for it technically, although in Part 91 operations that can be delayed.
You didn't have to, yeah.
Exactly.
You had options.
But with that option, the consideration of the actual time of the engine, I also have that I'm in my last year of full-time employment with UPS. So I figured it's a good time to pursue a more expensive consideration for my personal airplane while I'm gainfully employed. So that is a contributing factor to the decision to go ahead with the hot section. The other part is I'm very safe and safety conscious when I approach my private airplane. So if something is suggested by the manufacturer, a safety improvement, then I'm going to follow it to the best of my ability at that time. The timing hit for 1,800 hours for the hot section. I decided to go ahead and pursue that. At the same time, I went ahead and upgraded to the Behringer wheel and brake system for the PA46, a huge improvement in ground handling. And as you mentioned before, when we were talking about avionics improvement, after I bought the airplane originally, I added the GFC 600 autopilot. Yeah. So comparing that to the 7.4, the only thing the 7.4 has differently than the capabilities of that autopilot of the GFC 600 on the JetPROP is the 7.4 adds auto throttles and auto land. That's the only difference. So it was a huge contributor to safety. So if I'm going to be safety minded, then I wanted the hot section at 1,800 hours while I'm gainfully employed and can pursue it. As far as decisions to go to a shop, I wanted the best that I could comfortably get to, and I used Meade Aircraft, Olathe, Kansas. They performed an annual and set up the engine for the hot section, which went to Dallas Aeromotive. I think it's called Standard Aero. Now, and they performed the hot section.
Let me hit pause for just a second and just say Kevin Meade has been singularly outstanding to our community. And, technically we have a maintenance shop today, but I am of the opinion that there is plenty of work in the world and that the marketplace is big for all of us. And I'll tell you, Kevin, a little shout out for Kevin, I guess is the point. He's got a great shop. And he's really at the tip of the spear for what's going on out there in the world. Both Kevin and Ed do a wonderful job out there. And working with them on the hot section, did it go well?
Yes, it was a good experience overall. And I was encouraged to pursue the hot as well by Kevin and his team that did the bore scope. They noticed a couple of cracks in the combustion liner, and they said that probably should be investigated further. So that contributed to my decision to go on with the hot section at the time of my annual, which was just completed a month ago. Once the hot section was opened up, of course, this is an inspection, so you don't know. There could be absolutely nothing to fix, and they put it all back together, and you have the inspection charge. we were anticipating that some of the combustion liner elements would need to be replaced, and ultimately 5 or 6 were replaced. And then also they noticed that a CT vane needed to be tested, and it was ultimately replaced as well. That produced a bit of a delay because to get a CT vane for that engine, the Dash 35, with the specific numbers that are required, there was only one apparently available on the Pratt & Whitney bench stock. So a bit of give and take was required to get that part earlier, to get the engine completed and get out of annual and back to flying the JetPROP. This whole process, because of
What do you mean give and take?
Well, it took an extra amount of money to buy the CT vane off the shelf as opposed to what was originally quoted, which would have taken another 3 months to get it overhauled. To avoid that additional 3-month delay, I say it's worth the additional premium to get the CT vane off the shelf and get the airplane flying again. So all of it in was 3 months, and it could have been 6 months or longer to have waited for an overhaul of my own engine's CT vane.
Golly. Okay, so the problem here was parts.
Yes, parts availability, Pratt & Whitney supplier, it's becoming difficult.
And then here's the point. Here's a point that I want to. You hit a bunch of little points there. Number one, it's an inspection. You could open up the engine, and it'd be just really great, and everything looks good, and you put it back together, hot section's complete. But when you open up an engine and you look inside, anything that's not going to meet the standard, you have to deal with. And
Correct.
There's your problem. Is that crack? Did it propagate into an area that the borescope didn't show? How far the measurements are? How long is the crack? Do the cracks go together and create a part that might fall off inside all this has parameters, and whatever they are, you are going to get to pay for it. But now we're talking about parts are being available as well, because the hot section, they can say, oh, that's going to take a month. And all of a sudden it's not a month, purely because the parts still. So we're still in a place, even though we're 4 or 5 years past the start of COVID, we're still in a place where parts just aren't quite there.
Right, exactly.
It's a tough one out there. So the person that's listening to this podcast and they own a turbine engine and they're thinking to themselves, well, I'll do a hot section. I'll be out in a month. Maybe not. Maybe not. Depends on the engine that you're flying. If you look at a Dash 35, the Dash 35 is pretty much only on the JetPROP. There's a few other that are pretty close. They probably have some intermingling parts, but there's just not prolific out there. If you look at the Dash 42, the Dash 42 is on a bunch of King Airs. All the King Air 200s, not all of them, a bunch of King Air 200s have the Dash 42 on them. And so there's more of them out there, probably more stuff on the shelf, but the parts are the issue here.
Right.
And supply and demand comes up, and when the supply is low, the demand is high, the prices go up. And
do you want it or not?
And it really comes down to that. The other problem you have with a hot section is the same thing you have with an annual inspection. In other words, you take your airplane to a maintenance facility, you do an annual inspection, you hand them your airplane, and they have a monopoly. They have whatever they say is going to go, meaning that if it's airworthy, and I have to justify that word airworthy, but some pilots feel like they're held under ransom or held under, I don't really want to do that particular thing, but they're making me do it. When you do a hot section, you're doing the same thing. You're taking that hot section off, sending it into a place like Dallas Airmotive, and getting that, whatever they say, that's it. You're going to do it, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And that's the scary. Were you, when you did make the decision to do the hot section, were you a little scared?
Of course, it's tentative when you could be possibly looking at a very large bill. So you have to be prepared for the outcome.
That's right. The scary part of a hot section to me is obviously you had cracks that you knew were there, and you knew they were going to measure them and make that go down. The other part of it is the blades. And when you get to a hot section, what can happen is they can inspect the blades by pulling 2 blades off of the compressor turbine and basically cut them in half, look at the blade under a microscope, and if they see heat damage, Now you get to buy every blade that's on that compressor turbine. And if you do that, then you have to go onto the other side to the power turbine, sacrifice 2 of those blades. And if they see heat damage, you get to go to the next, like on a Dash 42, you have a second layer of blades on the power turbine section. The point is all those blades are 2,500 a pop, and there's 40 plus blades in each section. The point is, I mean, you do the math real quick, you get some bad blades, you get some overheated blades, you get something of this, and you get to buy a bunch of blades because that engine's turning, north of 36,000 RPM in the NG section at times, depending upon how hard you run it and what altitude you're at. But you get one blade, you're going to get to buy all the blades. It's just hot sections can go from a $25,000 event up to a $125,000 up to a $200,000 event very quickly, and you got to be prepared for that.
Right.
You got to be prepared. What was it like for you to say, okay, do a hot section? And I guess you had in the back of your mind, I got some cracks, I probably ought to look at this. What was it like to say, okay, go do that, knowing you could be staring down a 6-digit invoice?
Well, I prepared for it in advance. Having been owner of the JetPROP for almost 5 years now, I've been socking it away, so to speak, just in case it came time for the hot section, which it did. And again, for safety purposes, I went ahead with it. So I'm thrilled with it now, and we're good to go for another 1,800 hours.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm going to say is that you said it earlier, you're Part 91. Are you bound to have to do it? And the answer is no. You do not have to do a hot section if you don't want to. Now, the problem is that if you do the hot section late, or if you don't do it at all and you're able to get to overhaul, that overhaul could be very expensive because you might have to buy all the blades, or you might have to, in other words, there's a whole bunch of parameters. It can be more pushing off that hot section. There's a debate that would be in the world where it would say you can push back the hot section and maybe save money, or there could be a debate that you do the hot section and save money by doing it early so that you ensure there's nothing wrong. Right. I think you were actually pretty smart. If you knew you had cracks in your a stator or a combustion liner or something inside there, the cracks don't hardly ever get better, and you really want to know what's good. So if you're at midlife, you're at manufacturer recommended time to do the hot, I think you made a great decision as far as that's concerned.
Thanks.
But you gotta weigh it all out. It's not just a slam dunk, easy decision, as far as that's concerned. And the thing I want people to hear now is that parts can delay this, and you could be 6 months more without your airplane if you do the wrong hot section with the wrong place. Place like Meade and Dallas Airmotive and things of this nature. You're just dealing with good people, and that are making good decisions about you and your airplane.
Well, if you plan to go ahead with it, then you can do it on your timeline and your anticipated timeline, which might be a better opportunity for you to do it. If you wait and you're forced to do it later, then it might not be convenient, and you could have that extra delay that we talked about.
That's right. All right, let me pivot first just a second into one, because you mentioned something earlier. You've mentioned twice that this is your last year.
Yes.
In the 747-800, there's going to be a last flight. And I'll tell you, I don't know what'll happen with you, but whenever I see the fire hoses come out and they shoot the two, the two arcs of water over the airplane, I don't know how you'd get a fire hose to do the width of a 747-800, but that would be an impressive thing. But there's going to be a day where you hit your last flight, and you have 11 months-ish until that last flight comes. And I'm asking this because there's a bunch of people listening to this podcast that are, your days as a 747-800 pilot are rapidly hitting their sunset.
Sure.
That's the word I'm going to use, is a sunset flight. There's going to be a day that you don't fly the 747-800 anymore. There's also pilots out there listening to this that are not going to fly their JetPROP or their Meridian or their whatever it is that they've got anymore. As you approach that sunset, as you approach it coming, how do you mentally think about it? How do you deal with it? What goes through your mind?
Well, I think of transition. It's been a great career. I enjoy it. I'm not particularly thrilled to have that sunset, but it's inevitable. So since you know it's coming, and I have the privilege of knowing that it's coming, I can plan for a transition. And therefore, the JetPROP came into my life 4 or 5 years ago when we started working together, Joe, and you trained me initially. So now that's my focus. As I complete my career professionally, then I'm going to transition to flying the JetPROP for enjoyment and travel. And then at some point, the JetPROP is a sophisticated, high-performance airplane that requires exceptional training and skill level. At some point, that will also sunset. And I've thought about, well, what if at that point? Well, I may transition down to something else like a Super Cub. You tell me I need tail dragger training anyway.
That's right. That's right.
That could happen. But I think as time goes on, you enjoy what you've done, and you take those skills and put them forward into a new adventure.
Yeah, I think people that make that transition well are people that really do well in life. And I just think you're going to be great. I don't know. I think you're going to do really well at this. And but I kind of wonder, how would I treat that if I were you? And I just think you're going to savor the moments, because your life is going to change. But you've had such an interesting career where you transitioned into the military, then out of the military, and then into UPS. And as you've made these transitions, everybody makes these transitions in our life. And it's hard for a person. I've seen there to be a place where where you have a date on the calendar. It's going to be your birthday, and that's it. You can't fly past that, and you know it's coming. There's people in this owner-flown world that don't have a date on the calendar, but they do have a date that will arrive, where they get worse and worse and worse, and making that transition is something that's worth discussing, worth talking about, worth making the transition well, to move out of this. I've helped so many pilots make the decision to transition to sell their airplane, whether it is their mission changes or their financial position. They lose their income, and now they have a retirement position. They don't want the airplane dragging their finances down, or they hit a health concern and they make the transition. Anyway, I think the point behind the whole thing is just to be able to transition well. And I suspect you're going to do a great job of that when this season comes. If I had to dump the 747-800 and move into the JetPROP's got to be a nice cushion for that, because you're moving it. I mean,
Exactly.
You're already there, and it's just like, I get to keep flying in my gorgeous airplane. And I just think you're doing it. You're doing it so well.
Well, thank you, Joe, and keep it flying. That's the goal.
Yeah, when I think about people like you, that I got a feeling. As a matter of fact, I know it because we were talking about it earlier. If they didn't have this rule, if Congress all of a sudden were to wave their magic wand and say it's okay for you to fly to 67 or push it back to your 70, I don't even know. You're probably going to keep on flying.
Oh, I certainly would, because I enjoy it. I'm physically active, and I have good health.
That's it.
But I think, of course, if that ever happened, it would need to be tailored to the medical and those kind of considerations. But as long as I can pass the medical, I would keep flying.
And that's the point. You love flying, and that makes you a person that we like. We love people that love to fly. So good stuff. Scott Smith, thanks a bunch for joining the Malibu Guru Podcast and giving us a perspective on what's going on in your life and what's going on in the world of a 747-800 pilot. It's always my pleasure when you walk in the door.
Thank you, Joe. Great to be here. Appreciate your expertise.
All right. And this is a really cool aviator with a really cool, interesting past, flying some really cool airplanes. And it's interesting to talk with somebody that really loves aviation. We love aviation here too. We just think that flying airplanes and anything that flies, we just think it's cool. We're like Scott in that way. Joe Casey with Casey Aviation with Scott Smith signing out.